Long, long ago, the young heir of Lambton led a careless, profane life, regardless alike of his duties to God and man, and in particular neglecting to attend Mass, that he might spend his Sunday mornings in fishing. One Sunday, while thus engaged, having cast his line into the weir many times without success, he vented his disappointment in curses loud and deep, to the great scandal of the servants and tenantry as they passed by the chapel at Brugford. Soon afterwards he felt something tugging at his line, and trusting he had at last secured a fine fish, he exerted all his skill and strength to bring his prey to land. But what were his horror and dismay on finding that, instead of a fish, he had only caught a worm of most unsightly appearance. He hastily tore the thing from his hook and flung it into a well close by, which is still known by the name of the Worm Well. The young heir had scarcely thrown his line again into the stream when a stranger of venerable appearance, passing by, asked him what sport he had met with, to which he replied, "Why, truly, I think I have caught the devil himself. Look in and judge." The stranger looked, and remarked that he had never seen the like of it before, and it resembled an eft, only it had 9 holes on each side of its mouth, and finally that he thought it boded no good. The worm remained unheeded in the well till it outgrew so confined a dwelling place. It then emerged, and betook itself by day to the river, where it lay coiled round a rock in the middle of the stream, and by night to a neighbouring hill, round whose base it would twine itself, while it continued to grow so fast that it soon could encircle the hill 3 times. This eminence is still called the Worm Hill. It is oval in shape, on the north side of the weir, and about 1.5 miles from old Lambton Hall. The monster now became the terror of the whole countryside. It sucked the cow's milk, worried the cattle, devoured the lambs, and committed every sort of depredation on the helpless peasantry. Having laid waste to the district on the north side of the river, it crossed the stream and approached Lambton Hall, where the old lord was living alone and desolate. His son had repented of his evil life, and had gone to the wars in a distant country. On hearing of their enemy's approach, the terrified household assembled in council. Much was said, but to little purpose, till the steward, a man of age and experience, advised that the large trough which stood in the courtyard should immediately be filled with milk. This was done without delay. The monster approached, drank the milk, and, without doing further harm, returned to the weir to wrap his giant form around his favourite hill. The next day he was seen recrossing the river. The trough was hastily filled again, and with the same results. It was found that the milk of 9 kye was needed to fill the trough, and if this quantity was not placed there every day, regularly and in full measure, the worm would break out into a violent rage, lashing its tail round the trees in the park and tearing them up by the roots. The Lambton Worm was now the terror of the North Country. It had not been left altogether unopposed. Many a gallant knight had come out to fight the monster, but all to no purpose, for it possessed the marvellous power of reuniting itself after being cut asunder, and thus was more than a match for the chivalry of the North. So, after many conflicts and much loss of life and limb, the creature was left in possession of its favourite hill. After 7 long years, the heir of Lambton returned home, a sadder and a wiser man, returned to find the broad lands of his ancestors waste and desolate, his people oppressed and well nigh exterminated, his father sinking into the grave overwhelmed with care and anxiety. He took no rest till he had crossed the river and surveyed the worm as it lay coiled round the foot of the hill. Then, hearing how its former opponents had failed, he took counsel in the matter from a sibyl or wise woman. At first the sibyl did nothing but upbraid him for having brought this scourge upon his house and neighbourhood, but when she perceived that he was indeed penitent, and desirous at any cost to remove the evil he had caused, she gave him her advice and instructions. He was to get his best suit of mail studded thickly with spearheads, to put it on, and thus armed to take his stand on the rock in the middle of the river, there to meet his enemy, trusting the issue to Providence and his good sword. But she charged him before going to the encounter to take a vow that, if successful, he would slay the first living thing that met him on his way homewards. Should he fail to fulfil this vow, she warned him that for 9 generations no lord of Lambton would die in his bed. The heir, now a belted knight, made the vow in Brugford Chapel. He studded his armour with the sharpest spearheads, and unsheathing his trusty sword, took his stand on the rock in the middle of the weir. At the accustomed hour the worm uncoiled its snaky twine, and wound its way towards the hall, crossing the river close by the rock on which the knight was standing, eager for combat. He struck a violent blow upon the monster's head as it passed, on which the creature, irritated and vexed, though apparently not injured, flung its tail round him as if to strangle him in its coils. Now was seen the value of Sybil's advice. The closer the worm wrapped him in its folds, the more deadly were its self-inflicted wounds, till at last the river ran crimson with gore. Its strength thus diminished, the knight was able at last with his good sword to cut the serpent in two. The severed part was immediately borne away by the swiftness of the current, and the worm, unable to reunite itself, was utterly destroyed. During this long and desperate conflict, the household of Lambton had shut themselves within doors to pray for their young lord, he having promised that when it was over he would, if conqueror, blow a blast on his bugle. This would assure his father of his safety, and warn them to let loose the favourite hound, which they had destined as the sacrifice on the occasion, according to the Sibyl's requirements and the young lord's vow. When, however, the bugle notes were heard within the hail, the old man forgot everything but his son's safety, and, rushing out of doors, ran to meet the hero and embrace him. The heir of Lambton was thunderstruck. What could he do? It was impossible to lift his hand against his father, yet how else to fulfil his vow? In his perplexity, he blew another blast. The hound was let loose. It bounded to its master. The sword, yet reeking with the monster's gore, was plunged into its heart, but all in vain. The vow was broken, the Sibyl's prediction fulfilled, and the curse lay upon the house of Lambton for 9 generations.